When I was a little kid, about the age of my daughter now, I was, like most kids from time to time, afraid of the dark. I went through a phase of sleeping on my parents' bedroom floor, which my daughter is also doing now. It took the promise of my first Schwinn bicycle, along with a picture hanging on my wall of a rather blonde-haired, blue-eyed, surfer-looking Jesus holding a lost sheep. It took all of that to get me back into my own bed. But every night after that, for who knows how long, my mom would tuck me into bed with the words from the first chapter of 2 Timothy. The translation that she used and that I was made to memorize says it this way: God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of peace and love and a sound mind. I can still hear her gently say this to me. And while I know that this helped me a little bit then, I also know that it stirred up some guilty feelings as well. When I did feel afraid, was that okay? Did it mean I was lacking in my faith? Or maybe God only gave Paul and Timothy a spirit of peace and love and a sound mind. Maybe it was only something for special people. But as I grew up, and as I continue to grow up, I find these words immeasurably helpful, and I am grateful that I was made to memorize them. We now use a more current translation here, one that was read earlier and that bears reading again. God has not given us a spirit of cowardice, but rather a spirit of power, of love, and self-discipline. And what I've come to understand is that we all have that kind of spirit inside of us. It only needs to be fanned into flame and nurtured. That happens with time and experience. Courage is like a muscle that we can make stronger with practice. Some experiences that cultivate courage are a kind of crucible. It feels like our current reality is this kind of crucible. The course of humanity is littered by many of these times that divide the timeline of human history into a before and an after. The time that Paul was writing to Timothy was one such time in the history of the church. The Roman powers were doing what they were always trying to do: squash the spirit of this new and growing movement of wide and diverse groups of people who would eventually come to be known as Christians. Paul was in prison for doing this work. The series of letters to Timothy is considered to be the last of his pastoral letters, and ones that are particularly personal. We don't know all the circumstances that motivated Paul to write this letter, but we can deduce that Timothy needed some help. He needed some encouragement and hope. Paul reminds him of his spiritual matriarchs, his grandmother Lois and his mother Eunice, who first nurtured his faith, and Paul reminds him that their faith still lives on in him. We also have our Loises and our Eunices, those who have gone before, who have nurtured our faith and our spirits, and many of whom have lived through similar or much more trying times. My mom grew up in the Second World War, as did some of you watching today. That experience shaped her, as it might have you. Her stories of blackouts and of the rationing of Hershey's chocolate syrup seemed to equally send a shudder down her spine. I learned to just listen and let her tell the story again and again every time I mindlessly poured Hershey syrup on an ice cream sundae. I take heart in knowing that her perseverance and courage are both in my physical and spiritual DNA. So let me tell you something, friends. Courage and perseverance are in your DNA too. Even if you look back on your lineage and you can't find your Lois or your Eunice, if you're a part of a faith community, even if only virtually, you are automatically the recipient of this kind of faith and courage. This is one reason why the sacrament of communion is so very central to us. We believe that in the breaking of the bread and the offering of the cup, that we are united to every believer that has ever lived. It is the meal of fellowship that goes all the way back to the Last Supper and transcends every time and place. We believe that the same Spirit that lived in them lives in us. In fact, it is the same Spirit that lived in Eunice and Lois and Timothy and Paul that lived in, now Hancock folks will know a few of these names. It is the same Spirit that lived in Jonas Clark and Christopher Collier, Al Wilson and Marion Ritter, Shirley Hamlin and Horace Biesecker, and my mom Jan, and my niece Wen, and countless other saints of recent past. Fill in your own here. That same Spirit lives on in you. And the Spirit that we have is one of power and of love and self-discipline. So what does that look like now? Ever since having had my own children, when I tuck them in at night, I ask God to help them grow into the Spirit that God has given them, of power, of love, and of self-discipline, while also letting them know that if they need to sleep on our floor for a while, that's okay. In fact, acknowledging our fear can be part of courage. My favorite definition of courage says this: courage is fear that has said its prayers. So courage right now might look like this: the courage to not have to do things perfectly, the courage to drastically reduce the expectations you have of yourself and your family members, the courage to ask for the help that you need when you need it, the courage to admit when you are afraid, the courage to pick up the phone and make phone calls, to tell the ones that you love in no uncertain terms that you love them, the courage to simply be human and to allow others the grace to be human as well. In time, I am hopeful that we will know more what actions we can take in the current crisis. For now, we do the responsible thing and we stay home as much as possible. We practice physical distancing while being relationally available. We pray for medical professionals on the front lines. We pray for those who have no safety net as the economy struggles. We pray and we pray and we pray and we check on each other, knowing that suddenly some have too much time on their hands, while some have less time than they have ever had, as they are juggling homeschooling while still working a full-time job, all from home. For now, we stay connected and grounded in the Spirit that we have been given, which unites us through time and space. It was common in Greco-Roman letters to start with a typical salutation that this letter to Timothy begins with: a blessing of grace and peace, an expression of gratitude for the reader, then launching into the heart of the message. And I'm doing the opposite of that. I'm ending rather than beginning with such an address. Paul is unusually emotional in this, his last letter to his beloved Timothy. I've always had a sort of academic understanding of that, but as I read and reread the passage for today, I had a personal understanding. Certainly we are not in jail. As Paul was. But we are separated in ways that we are not used to, ways that are new for us. And so I have a different level of connection and emotion with these words that he wrote. I pray for you day and night. I long to see you. Church, dear friends, we pray for you day and night. And while we do long to physically see you, we do see you, and you are ever with us. We love you dearly. May you know even more deeply the power of the Spirit of the love of God that forever and ever connects us. So grace and peace be yours, now and forever, through Jesus Christ, our dear beloved. Amen.